Start. Hey everyone, it's Phil Wade from Dalton Wade Real Estate Group. Today we're joined by Laurie, Talia, Clarence holding the phone, and today we're going to talk about protecting your buyer's deposit regarding the financing contingency. So, you know, you're in essence your buyer. If they're getting a loan, they have two contingencies in their contract. One is the home inspection. Obviously, they can walk away for any reason. And then the second, which we're going to spend more time on today, and it's a little trickier, is the financing contingency. So basically, what a financing contingency is that if your buyer is unable to secure financing, they get their deposits back. Now, there are specific dates that you have to let the listing agent or the seller know that they're not getting the loan, and therefore they get their deposit back. But if that date goes by, the financing contingency expires, and then in essence your buyer is a cash buyer, and then if they can't come up with the cash, the seller can take their deposit. So we always want to make sure that that never happens. So basically, so that's the financing contingency date. So the financing contingency date, if you look in the as-is contract, it's paragraph 8. I encourage everybody to read the entire paragraph, but it talks about the loan commitment date, and then that's left blank, and the default is 45 days after the executed contract date. So if somebody executed a contract on September 30th, that's the next day. October 1st is the first day. On November 14th, or whatever exactly 45 days is later, they have to have their financing. Now, if you read on, it talks about having the loan commitment 7 days prior to closing date. So if you made the closing date November 8th, then on November 1st, which is whatever, 31, 32 days later, they have to have their financing in place, done deal. So let's kind of just review that again. So it's the earlier of whatever you put for their financing contingency date, or the earlier of 7 days before closing. So 7 days before closing, or if it's a 45-day closing and you put 30 days for them to have their loan, then it would be 30 days. If you put 45 days for them to have their loan and 45 days to close, then they have to have their loan on day 38. Talia, you look perplexed.
No, I just have to have a calendar. I'm a more visual
right.
person.
Well, having a calendar is important, and having those dates so that they don't go by, because what I see unfortunately happen is that sometimes the date goes by and then all of a sudden there's a problem with the person's loan, and it's like, uh-oh. So we don't want to have that happen. So, and again, I mean, you have to be talking to the buyer's lender. Claren was just saying she was doing a deal with, his name's Mike Hausman at TD Bank. Now, TD Bank, they don't give you a loan commitment. They just basically close. So there's actually no formal loan commitment to be given. Now, what is the loan commitment? The loan commitment is a letter from the lender that basically says that you've got the loan, that they're going to finance you. Now, you can get the loan commitment, and then there can be exceptions or things that still need to happen. Now, if it says you've got the loan, but we're waiting on the appraisal, well, that might be a problem, because if the appraisal doesn't come in, it comes in low, and then they don't have the extra cash, or they don't want to make it up, they may not be able to get the loan. And then the date's gone by, and it can be a problem, and then it becomes uncertain as to whether or not they get there. So you have to actually read the loan commitment and see what it says, see if there's any contingencies, anything they still need to do. Typically you might see verification of employment. I mean, if somebody loses their job the week before they're supposed to close, well, I mean, that's not our fault. We can't help that. So that's kind of one you assume is going to happen. But if it looks like they're having difficulty, it's stuck in underwriting, they're starting to become an issue. We just had one that was supposed to close, and then come to find out the person had filed bankruptcy like 7 years ago, and that's all fine, they were able to get the loan, but then they had student loans that they stopped paying on, and then that got found out, and that became an issue, couldn't close. So, you know, if that date had gone by, so you're checking with the underwriter on the financing contingency date, which is what? Let's putting you on the spot. Okay,
Put
so
me on the spot.
Claire, I'm putting you on the spot.
What is financing contingency?
Yeah,
date?
right.
The date that is the intended date that you're gonna close?
No,
That's
no.
7 days prior to
It's 7 days
closing,
prior?
or
Yeah.
45
It's
days.
it's the earlier of whatever you put in there for their financing contingency. Could be 30 days, 45 days, or 7 days prior to closing. So it's always 7 days prior to closing. You need to have that letter from their lender, or be, you know, I mean, you can never be 100% sure. Something always can come up. Who knows what can happen? But if it seems like there's an issue, like they're not going to be able to get the loan, or there's some question about it, then the question becomes for your client, what do you want me to do? And then what you want me to do are basically three things. And typically the first thing is you're going to ask the seller for an extension of the financing date and the closing date. So you're going to ask them for an extension, and then hopefully they grant that extension. If you're going to ask for an extension, make sure you ask, you know, for enough time, because you don't want to go back a second time, because then it starts to look like, you know, because all they want to do, the seller, they just want to close. They just want to know that, you know, the person's gotten their loan. Right now, maybe they have a backup offer, a cash offer, and now they're starting to get nervous about the buyer. So again, it's always better if you don't have to ask. That's why if you can deal with a lender that actually can deliver on time, that's always best. Yep, go ahead.
What time frame would you say is reasonable when you're asking for an extension so the seller won't run? Would it be like 15 days or 30 days is a stretch, or does it kind of gauge it by the seller?
I'd say a week,
A week?
tops.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's okay. It's more specific in terms of like what's going on.
Right.
Like, you know, hopefully you're in continual contact with their lender, and their lender's telling you, oh, we need 3 more days, we need a week. They're telling us. We're not deciding what it is, because they're really in charge of it all. I mean, we can't really do anything to sort of speed up their process. So
They know how many days it's gonna take for
It-
certain documents or things that they.
right, exactly. So we're asking them how many. Right, the lender, how many days do they need, and then, you know, you kind of go from there, and then you ask. So if you ask and then they come back and say no, you know, then what do you do? Well, then you have to have a conversation with your client. Maybe you still need to extend the closing a week, but your financing contingency, the seller's wanting that to evaporate. Now, if you don't have that anymore, that's fine, provided your client can close. But then the problem becomes when they can't close. Like, they didn't get the loan, and now, you know, okay, then what happens to their deposit? So really, if they, you know, can't close, they don't have that financing contingency, it probably ends up going to the seller. So it's not, and then again, it's your client's decision. Like, okay, I'm willing to basically go, you know, without this contingency, because I'm 99% certain I'm getting the loan. Now, if they want to back out, then they can back out, and then they would get their deposit back. And, you know, they're not able to buy the house. So that's why it's very important to deal with a lender that actually lives. And when you're writing the contract, you want to ask them. I mean, you don't want to say, gee, we can close in 30 days when they can't process the loan in 30 days. That doesn't make any sense. So you want to have that dialogue with their lender, and maybe somebody you're already working with, you already know how long they take to close, and maybe somebody new. You know, every lender's different in terms of how much time they need, so you want to be checking with them so that you're actually giving them enough time to do what they have to do. So again, it's you know, to me, it's very straightforward. It's not a difficult concept, but I continue to see why I've had this training probably 3 or 4 times in the last year, because I still see it get messed up, and there's really no need for it. It's just something that, you know, when it comes down to, you know, that date, you have to be talking to the lender. You know, are we good to go? Is there anything that can cause us a problem? And if they tell you there is, they're not quite done, it's still in underwriting, it's a tougher loan, you know, who knows, I mean, people have issues, you know, that come up, you know, like the student loan issue, you know, and then obviously in that case, you know, she wasn't able to get funded, and in that case, it was new construction, so that was a little bit different, as opposed to the as-is contract. So in that contract, you know, she was able to get her money back, so not an issue. But we always want to be thinking, you know, if that person is unable to get the loan and they don't have the financing contingency, not good. So, any questions? Any questions in Periscope land? Alrighty, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week, hopefully on a more interesting
Oh wait,
subject. Yep.
when is the drop date you can pull out and get your money back?
All right, the drop dead date is, so basically, if you look, I believe it's line, you know, 93 in the contract. You're gonna, if you don't fill that in, the default is 45 days, okay? The closing 45 days, if you read on, line 106 to 121 talks about 7 days prior to, the shorter of whatever's in line 93 or 7 days prior to closing. So whatever is the first date, that's the last date that that person has the financing contingency.
But you would only be able to pull out of that if you weren't getting the loan. That's how I think he might mean the inspection period. The like 10 day or
Yeah, well,
whatever
the 10
inspection
that's-
at the
that's-
beginning.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can pull out for any reason, you know, based on the inspection period. I mean, you know, the dog ate the homework, you know, people were having a bad day, you know, the husband doesn't like the house anymore, whatever, for whatever reason. You don't even have to do the home inspection. You can put in multiple offers on several properties, right?
Yeah, I don't like to though.
But you can do that, and then basically, you know, and if one of them or two of them get accepted, yeah, well, you can only buy one house. But I mean, you would want to be courteous to the listing agent and tell them right away that your client's not going forward. But that's what it is. That's why a lot of times the sellers want to shorten that contingency period, the home inspection contingency period, so that they know, because you can get out for any reason whatsoever. The financing contingency is usually and almost always after that. It's typically 30 days, 45 days. That's about how long it takes to process the loan. FHA, VA might be a little bit longer, but again, ask the lender. But in terms of the last date is either what is on line 93, and if you leave that blank, it's 45 days, or 7 days prior to closing. Whatever date comes first, that's the last day. That's the day you need to be like calling up the lender. Do we have this loan? Where's the loan commitment? I need it. If you actually read the contract, it says you're supposed to deliver the loan commitment to the seller. I mean, that doesn't happen all the time, but that's technically what it says. So on that day, and again, you should have a big sticky or a note, you know, and you're watching that date and you're talking to the lender. Because, you know, if they've been slow, or maybe your client's been a little slow getting the documentation to them, what ends up happening is most lenders, they don't process the file until it's 100% complete. Everything needs to be in the appraisal, the tax transcripts, all the buyer's documentation, and then once there's the total package, that's when they send it into underwriting, and then typically, you know, it should come out in a few days after that. So, but that's the last day is either you know, line 93, 45 days, or 7 days prior to closing.
He asked if you have the money but want to pull out before closing. I don't get.
If you have the money.
But yeah, I don't get
well,
it.
you can't pull out at that point because,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, again, we had another situation where someone wanted to pull out because they didn't like the house anymore. They sort of were able to get the lender to give them a denial letter. You know, we gave the denial letter, you know, to the seller, and they were fine with it. So again, it's more when you run into somebody like me, who's the listing agent, like, and kind of can smell a rat, you know, and then well, yeah, because basically, you know, you're saying you're going to do something and then you don't do it. Well, you don't get your money back. I mean, that's why the deposits are there. They're there to make you do what you say you're going to do. I mean, so, you know, I'm really not a rat, but yeah. But I mean, again, you're protecting your client's interests if you're on the seller side. You know, I mean, you can kind of tell, like, oh, they never did the appraisal, and now they're denied the loan, huh? Like, it doesn't always make sense. But basically, if you're working for the buyer, you just want to talk to the lender. Hopefully, again, you're working with a lender that is able to, meet the dates they told you. And again, like I have, for me, it's one strike with a lender. One time they screw up, I'm never using them again. It's too much stress. I've worked too hard to get all that way and then have them screw up my transaction. So I don't even ever want to talk to them again.
But what if the client picked that lender?
Well, then I'm never probably going to use them again anyways. I
Okay,
mean,
yeah.
because the lenders I use deliver. So I don't, that's again why you want to have your client, if you can. And a lot of times, so that they're a first-time home buyer, they're all happy, everything's good, and then the stress starts because they're with a big bank who's all of a sudden gotten really busy with refis.
I know.
Talia's husband works for a bank. So anyways, they're not going to go hire a bunch of people for 3 weeks to process those loans. What happens is now all of a sudden there's a backlog, and they tend not to be as responsive as, if you're dealing with a mortgage company, they tend, for whatever reason I found, they can put that loan that's needing more attention, it's easier to get it to the top of the pile, so to speak. So they're two separate contingencies. There's the inspection contingency. You can get out for any reason. Once that's gone by, if your client is getting a loan, the last contingency they have is the financing contingency. So just understand those dates. It's not complicated. And then when it gets to that last day, that if they don't have the loan, it's a problem. I mean, because then you have to either come up, and again, you're not doing these things in a vacuum. You're talking to your client. It looks like you're going to get the loan. What do you want us to do? And usually the first course of action is ask for an extension. See if you can get that date extended. Hopefully the seller's reasonable. Typically, they usually maybe will give you one extension. You never know, because maybe they have a cash backup offer that's higher than your client's offer, right? And then your client's they want to kick your client out. So that's why, again, if you have a lender that can deliver, you never even had to ask for the extension. I mean, you don't want to ask. I mean, it's because they don't have to give it to you.
Right.
Any other questions? Alrighty, thanks for tuning in.